and welcome to the show. I'm Peter Whittle. Now, obviously we have on this channel covered, well, seemingly every angle of woke or wokery, woke ideology, call it what you like. What we haven't really covered is basically how much this thing is costing, and indeed how much it might cost you. So I'm delighted this week that our guest is the journalist Charlotte Gill, who has been looking at this very thing. Charlotte, thank you for joining us.
Thanks.
You've established something, haven't you, on Substack and Twitter called Woke Waste. Why did you start this?
So it all started, it is a bit of a convoluted story, but it kind of went back to me trying to make it as a writer when I was younger, and I really wanted to write a novel. I just had this idea that I was going to write a bestseller. And the problem when I first started out was no one really knows who I am. But as I got older and actually had a bit more of a writing profile, the problem was they do know who I am. And I'm a bit, right wing and white and straight and all these things. Because what you find now, if you look at publishing agents, and they list all their requirements. So the publishing agent, it's like the middleman that goes to the publisher. And you find that they're like, we want not like diverse, non-binary. They like just list identities. And you feel, obviously there's an element like, is the product actually good in itself? But you feel like that's become secondary to these hoops you've got to jump through, which are immutable characteristics.
Yeah.
And it's very disenfranchising. So I guess that tapped me into the whole woke thing, the feeling of sort of like, this isn't very fair that people are just being deemed too represented to get representation and vice versa. But the more I sort of poked away at it, I actually got my opportunity from Alistair Heath from The Telegraph, because I wrote an opinion. I used to be an opinion journalist, and I wrote this opinion piece that was sort of me being like, this is really annoying me, in kind of opinion form. And I sent it to Alistair and I said, is it of interest? And he hooked me in with his news team, and they wanted me to do it as a news piece. And I'd never done news journalism before. And so he kind of opened that world to me. And it is a bit of a convoluted story, but long story short, I started digging, they wanted more after that. And then the more I dug away at like other woke areas, like not just publishing, the more I was like, there's a money trail here.
Yeah.
Like the money is funding woke. And it started when I looked at, I basically just started thinking, what else can I find that's really woke? And the one that came to mind was local councils.
Yeah.
Started seeing how much they were spending. And then I started looking at universities. And one day I went down, I saw there was like a non-binary study about non-binary in higher education. And I always have a good look around everything, anything that's kind of a bit weird. And one of the first things I do is I always put all the names of the researchers in, have a dig around them. And it led me to this portal where I found that one of the researchers had worked on some sort of pregnant man study.
Pregnant man study?
Yeah, and it had money attached to it. And I was like, what am I looking at? What is this thing?
Yeah.
And I had no idea that I was on, so it's the UK Research and Innovation website. And I don't know how much, basically like hardly anyone knows about it really.
I don't know. That's why I'm talking to you.
It's like the biggest thing no one's ever heard of. I mean, it's government funded, so it's funded by the Department of Science, Innovation and Technology. And it receives a budget of just under 9 billion a year.
9 billion?
Yeah, of our money. And the way to think of it is it's like an umbrella structure. So there's the Department of the government, then it goes into the UK Research and Innovation, and then it's got 9 different subsidiaries, and they all get varying levels of money, but like almost 9 billion divided by 9, depending, leaving aside the varying amounts, they're getting a lot each in their different ways. And what I found is like, so some of them find studies like, they're doing cancer research and really important things, but there's a massive discrepancy. They're basically like equalizing the arts and humanities to studies about leukemia, in terms of their importance to taxpayers. And that's a bit, it's a bit controversial in itself.
Yes.
Like if you had a really austere economy, you wouldn't really be like, you'd be a bit cutting back on the arts anyway, because it's not as urgent. But then when you actually look at some of these studies as well, pregnant men, the Europe that gay porn built.
Yes, I mean, you've got so many examples, and I know, that you put them all on Twitter one by one. It's a great resource, for people who want to. I mean, probably the best way to talk about it is can we just look at a most recent example in your mind? I know that there's been something recently about the sheer amount of money that's being used by the civil service, isn't that right? For what you might call woke projects.
Yeah, that's something I knew about actually, because I have like little insiders now. I have loads of them that just tell me about things. They're like, you should look at this. Don't say that I said it. So I did get a while ago. I did get someone. I actually can't remember who they were, but they were like, because I just can't keep up. But they said you might want to check this out. You might want to do an FOI. And they're not really easy for me because, just as a one...
Freedom of information.
Yeah, freedom. So as a one-woman team, I was just like, I kind of knew something, but it's just, you need a team to be like doing that sort of stuff. But I knew that there was some big money, and I know that Guido Fawkes has exposed that today. So I think people are starting to realise, but what people might not know, one of my stories that I broke about the civil service that sort of explains some of the diversity activity is, and this was in the beginning of researching this area and sort of working out, because it's so unbelievable that at first I was sort of like, am I right? Is that really, like, that's so crazy? But one of the first things was from the civil service, and this was another resource sent to me. Some of my early resources were from gender critical feminists, like, look at this, and because they knew I was interested, but no one knew that it came attached to the whole baggage of spending. And one of them sent me this newsletter about queer history or something, Queer History Month, and it was from a company called Versida, and it was written on behalf of, I think it was the DC, like the Department of Culture, and it had this trans woman with purple hair called like India something, and it said that it was saying that the Napoleonic Wars were part of queer history. Napoleonic Wars?
Yeah, really?
It was just, so this person, India, and it sounds like, I actually, the civil service actually really tried to stop me naming this person. Like they were quite, like, it was a bit weird.
So this was commissioned?
Yeah, so this was the Telegraph that I looked into it for.
Yeah.
No, sorry, sorry, I get you now. So this was commissioned by the civil service. So,
right.
So when I looked at the email, I was like, it just looked, this purple-haired person writing about the Napoleonic Wars and queer history and all this crazy stuff. I was like, no, this cannot be to do with the civil service. Like they're just pretending that they're with the civil service. That's honestly what I thought. And so the first thing I did was I looked for this India person on Facebook, and I was trying to find like LinkedIn, and it said like, social media, but they almost look like a hologram, they look just so like a SIM card, like all the makeup and stuff. And then I went to the civil service, because still in sort of like, no, it's not them. And they were very cagey. And now I know in retrospect they're like that, but this was me very new to news journalism. So I was like, is this the way it works? I was like, can you just, you just put it so simply so that they can't dodge around it. It's just like, did you do this? Yeah. And every time they would just reply with something that was sort of a bit like, they just wouldn't answer the basic question. I was like, does she work for you?
But okay, so this is on how the Napoleonic Wars were part of queer history. What is the money involved in something like that then?
Well, eventually what happened, so they sent me a link onto a portal that showed that this wasn't the only thing that the civil service with this company had been spending money on.
Yeah.
So they would not answer the question. They were most concerned about me naming. They were like, we'll reply when we reply. We'll give you this, but can you not name India? Blah blah blah. And then eventually they just sent me. They still didn't say yes or no. They were just like, here's a link. And so then I clicked on the link, and I still want to go properly through all the links on this, but it's the contract finder. So it's completely like anyone can have a look. You know, it's the contract finder for the whole civil service. And you know, you think you find one thing. So this was £20,000. This contract, the first one with the Department of Culture, then went through the others, and it added up to over. It was like £260,000 altogether.
Really?
And they were doing it for like all sorts of departments. I mean, they had like some sort of women. They had all these crazy stuff to do with the civil service, like on their website. They're basically just a firm that other firms hire to make diversity more central to their mission.
So, right, okay, so we got that. There was one you mentioned there about how gay porn built Europe.
Yeah.
Which is sort of like almost, you're talking Monty Python surreality here. But can you give us a little bit of background about that one? Who did it? Who how did they get the money, and what was the money?
Yeah, it's really strange. And you know what? The guy that did it will watch this video because he's engaged in a sort of Twitter warfare with me. So he now watches.
Oh, I see.
He now
Hello.
like he now looks out. It's quite a strange situation actually.
Yeah.
So he likes watching them and then complaining on Twitter.
Okay.
So he's called actually I can't pronounce this, but he's a Portuguese professor, and so it started when I first saw the pregnant man study. I was like, well, what else do we have here? So I was just obsessive. This is how it started to get traction, because I just started to, every time I saw a crazy one, I was like, look, isn't this crazy, to my Twitter audience? And then the one that everyone was like, huh? Was the Europe that gave porn bill 1945 to 2000. And it got given £840,000.
£840,000 to go to this one man, or what?
So I think there's at least one other man who's done a lot of research on gay porn. Like, I can't remember how many, but there just seems to be no end of things to find out about.
Who gave the 800?
So this is so UKRI. To go back to that, one of their bodies is called the Arts and Humanities Research Council.
Oh, right, I've heard of them.
I really want people to like start remembering that name, because there's Arts Council England, which is also really woke and wasting a lot of our money. But then Arts and Humanities Research Council is probably worse. It's one of the worst parts of the UKRI. It's like the evil sibling. Not like, I don't know, I don't want them to like assume it, but he's funded by them. So they've decided that he deserves this grant to research gay porn. And the worst thing about it, I mean, what the professors will say is, and this is another interesting thing, because what they'll say, if you say, I can't believe you've had, you know, it's going to be like 2 people, 3 people max this team. And you're like, how have you had £840,000 to study gay porn? And they'll say, oh, but, you know, we don't get all of it, like the universities get it, you know, because this is a sinister thing about the grants. They're kind of like how the universities make their money. So they want these grants. They want people to keep, and that makes diversity even more important to them, because diversity is how you get money, and you prove it through things like studying gay porn, because that's diverse. So the more I looked with this guy, and he's Portuguese, and he also lives in Sweden, and he seems to live around Europe.
But the money has come from this country.
So he voted in the Swedish elections. I saw that on his Twitter feed, and I was like, why are we funding a Portuguese professor to study gay porn in Sweden? Yeah. And he spends a lot of his time doing pro-Palestine tweets, which is not uncommon in the publicly funded academic sector. So I found that. And then he had a different reaction to a lot of, I mean, when I first started doing this, academics were like very angry. You're an anti-intellectual, like, how dare you? Like, oh, you're a cretin, sort of thing. Then they sort of backed off, because I just went, you know, I went more on the offence, and I was like, no, you're the anti-intellectual. But he's pretty much the only one that seems to kind of, psychologically, I don't really know what's going on, because he likes teasing me. He likes kind of
Right.
he likes saying like, "Oh, Charlotte's done this," and it's crazy because it's like, you know, it's just asking for more attention. But then it feels a bit like maybe maybe he's getting a little thrill about his, like, will they ever defy? I don't know. But he
Sorry, is this a book he's meant to be producing, or what?
No.
If it's about gay porn in Europe or whatever, what is it he's meant to produce at the end of this? What's he got the money for?
I think it's going to be a long paper. I mean, I'll have to check off the top of my head. I don't know if it's, but I know that he has written, and they have quite pretentious names. They call them like monographs and things like that for their academic. Like, honestly, you have to Google a lot of their language, because they're like, I've made a monograph, and they love zine making, which is like kids art. But but when I started, the more he poked me, the more I was like, all right, I'll go and poke around, you know, your area as well. And you know, you think it can't get worse than the Europe the Gay Porn Bill, but actually it did. So I looked at his last study, and it's about gay pig masculinities. Gay pig masculinities. Pig. Yeah, I think I might have I bought quite a lot of sheets, but he'd had slightly less than the Europe that Gay Porn Bill for this.
Pig as in sort of like a fetish.
Yeah. So yeah, he got slightly less money. I think it was around just under £200,000, and he did this study. Yeah, it was about gay pig masculinity. So basically, he was studying like fetishes about gay men, specifically who find other men behaving as pig sexy.
But the thing is, you mentioned about the other one. He was voting in the Swedish elections or whatever. He's Portuguese.
Oh no, this is the same guy.
Yeah, no. Yeah. I mean, but about the other reports, right? How the hell did he end up even applying for something from, what was it, the DCMS here or whatever it was? You know, how did that even happen? How does that happen? You know, is it because they are advertised sort of Europe-wide, these kind of grants, or what?
A lot of the grants are advertised worldwide.
Right.
A lot of what it seems to happen, I mean, the best way I saw someone describe it is it's like the doll for people with blue hair. And what seems to happen is they come to the UK and they maybe do like a master's, and they never really want to get a real job.
Yeah.
It's just like, once you're in, you just keep getting grants to do, and that's how it works. You just think of your next grant. And sometimes they do advertise. One thing I think is a bit problematic actually is sometimes like these UKRI, these Quangos, they just put out, they're like, we've got a whole load of money here that you can apply for. And to me, that seems a really false way of doing it. Like, it should be an academic's got an incredible idea, and they know exactly the amount, and they're going to apply for it, and it should be really hard to get. Whereas the UKRI is just kind of like, roll up, like, we've got 10 of these, 10 bits of 200k to give away, and it's just all the wrong way around.
And this is all taxpayers' money, isn't it?
All taxpayers' money. And the thing is, it's actually what I see with people when they look at it, and me too. At first, it's kind of funny, like, haha, like, but then you're kind of angry.
Yeah.
Then you're bewildered.
Yeah.
And then you kind of move around this ultimately you just really feel, I mean, I feel a bit like, I enjoy it, but I feel like kind of a bit like, what's going on? Am I in some sort of matrix? Because it just feels like there's
it's people just, as you say, don't know. I mean, well, fortunately, thanks to what you're doing, they know a bit more now. But I mean, your average person, they do not know the level of profligacy, I would say, attached to this. I mean, a lot of people don't like the word woke now because it's too, and I can see this, it's almost too trivialized thing for what this is. But I mean, I know that some of the other areas you've gone into, a number of other areas which we can talk about, but you've sent as well, we've got some clips actually of, these are performances, aren't they, that have been basically funded in some way, but by us. Can you just sort of tell us a few of those? We'll play some as you're talking about.
Yeah, so in general, there's a really big, so this was a choir, it was called the Decolonized Choir. And I think it recently had its concert. and it was playing at, I think it was Tara Theatre, which is a global majority theatre. And we're still at the point of people not really knowing. I even said to my friend the other day, and she's Somali, I was like, do you know what global majority means? And she was like, what's that? And she's meant to be like, you know, they're using it to describe
What is
ethnic minority, BAME people now.
right? So basically, global majority is this term, I've heard it.
Yeah.
Right, which is basically being used to exclude the white. You know, in other words, everyone non-white, really.
Yeah. And it's really illogical, which a lot of woke stuff is. And if you challenge it, it's like you're the bigot rather than us having. But it means ethnic minority, even though they're global majority. But it also means BAME, and it means underrepresented, because woke has fashions, because there's so many, like almost the supply in the woke market. There's so many people now that are saying they've got marginalised identities that there's an element of, you have, like all markets, you have to differentiate in order to elevate yourself above all the other people you're competing with. So there does become an aspect of the language and things like that evolving, so that people do have more convoluted identities to out-marginalise each other.
So this choir, decolonisation.
Yeah, so they, so I can't remember how I found it, but I just saw a few like theatres they just say, we're a global majority theatre. There's one in Devon. I'm like, Devon, it's a very white area, presumably. It just seems, and so this choir it said it was against discrimination, but it was basically saying, don't come if you're white.
Yeah.
Or any other, I mean, I don't know like how many identities there are that don't fit into global majority, but just, you know, you can only come like if you're BAME or whatever. And then I just started watching the videos, and they had like a Palestine song, and which I know you're playing, like, then they had this other one called I Notice Myself. God, I actually can't remember what the lyrics are, but the weird thing is I actually really got it in my head after, I mean, I just started singing it around the flat, and it's awful, like, as you hear, like, it's terrible, but they just I mean, I was a bit nosy, because they just put files out. They were obviously like rehearsal files, but they were really out of tune. But I just thought, this is this just isn't like Martin Luther King's vision, is it? Just that you can't come to this.
So the decolonisation choir, so basically, where would they have got their money, and what are we talking about money-wise?
So that choir is funded, so technically, the choir themselves are not directly funded, but they are at a theatre, like their kind of residency is at a taxpayer-funded theatre called Tara Theatre, and they get their money from Arts Council England.
Right.
And I'm not actually sure off the top of my head how much it was, but it's like enough to get annoyed about. I think it was like a few 100,000. It's like sort of. I only ever really go for things if it's like, even though I think every penny counts, but you know, I only really concentrate. But so Arts Council England is like another hellhole of doom that I would scrub if I was a Conservative Prime Minister.
Well, actually, our very first report we did here at the NCF, getting on for 20 years ago now, was indeed how we should abolish the Arts Council. I mean, it had something like a £1 billion pound budget to spend at that time. Probably the same now. I mean, they've had cuts and everything, but what often people don't realise about the Arts Council, it was only ever meant to be a temporary body after the Second World War. And it was only meant to be there for a few years. And of course, it's in the nature of these things to grow. But I mean, even then, it was terrible. That's before we talked about woke necessarily. There's another thing, actually, which I think, again, we might have a picture of, or a clip of at least. And that's a very gruesome looking production that you highlighted on Twitter. There's a guy covered in blood, and is it a trans thing or something?
I think they're a she originally.
Yeah.
So that's called Blood Show.
Blood Show, that's it.
Yeah, and so this is a non-binary trans. It seems like it's a woman, and he's had a mastectomy. And they're called Ocean Chillingsworth. It's like a very, it's a very like convoluted name actually. I do have this one actually. So I'm almost a victim of bringing too many papers. So so this is, so Battersea Art Centre is playing
Battersea Art Centre, okay.
Blood Show. Most people have never heard of Battersea, unless you live in London, around that area. But the main thing to note is that from 2019 to 2023, it received 4.5 million in taxpayer funding. And it's worth pointing out that, I don't know what most people think, but I used to think that theatres just were like a normal business, that they just had to make a profit, and that's how. And I just I really didn't know that they pretty much all of them receive a lot of money from us. And so this Blood Show, it's the trans celebration of destroying things, and it's the third part in the trilogy of trans and non-binary artists Ocean Hester, Stefan Chillingsworth, in their Extinction trilogy. And this person has already, one thing I find really a bit creepy is I went on Chillingsworth's website, and one of the past plays all the plays look awful. Like, imagine a cat being stroked backwards and how that would feel in a human. Like, I feel like that is the feeling they evoke of just, ugh. And one of them is called Shorty. I find this really weird. It's about a non-binary drag child.
Drag child.
Yeah.
Yes. I saw the pictures of this kid with glasses.
Yeah, did you see the one? Like, in one, she has water to show. There's a bit about toilet trauma, and so she's dressed as a child that's wet itself.
Yes.
And I'm just like, this is it's a bit weird. And this person won't work with all cis, all white teams. And I just, like, I mean, it's just horrible anyway, but especially when you're kind of like embedded. So like the choir, this person is not directly funded. They've had a few grants here and there, but it's not really in the grand scheme of things. It's not. It's Battersea, especially because I went on. I've been watching Battersea for some time because they had this other show funded by the Arts Council through its National Lottery programme. So it's not taxpayer money per se, but they take the National Lottery, all the money they get through there. And I do want to tell people, don't buy a lottery ticket if you want to stop woke. And they funded this Kiwi artist. So I only bring this up because there's so many examples of us funding people that don't even live here. And they were non-binary, trans as well. And they were trying to get pregnant, and they had a show called First Trimester where they interviewed people to be their sperm donor. And the show was like, you watched them interview people, and it got like 64,000 or something. And like, I went on the Instagram, and like, this person is just back in New Zealand now, and I don't think they even found a sperm donor. I'm like, it didn't even work out. But the other one is, there was another person called, they were the world's premier first autistic green like drag queen or something. They were called Oozing Gloop. And when it said green, I was like, environmentalism? But this was a man who'd painted himself green as a sort of gender identity, like a goblin, like as if like, I'm lesbian, I'm green.
Yes.
And he'd also had, it wasn't big money, but he'd had like a residency. And this was all, so basically the common theme between this is Arts Council England. And it's just a disaster zone. The problem is that to get funding, you have to be woke, basically. That's what it comes down to. You have to prove that you're gonna do something environmental and that you're gonna improve diversity through your project. So there's a slight element of the artists almost like having to be woke.
Yes.
But they are woke generally anyway.
Yes, no, exactly. You do have to satisfy all these various different criteria, but basically the people are going to be going for that are pretty much, as you say, like that already. I mean, one thing interesting I've seen in woke waste that you talked about as well is the way in which essentially it's a very convoluted, or it seems convoluted, but charities and foundations give money, don't they, to various sort of good causes, supposedly. But those charities in turn are given money by the government, aren't they?
Yeah.
So often it turns out that the government is funding things which will probably be very anti the government, or at least a conservative government. Maybe it's different now, but But I mean, I think there's the case of Paul Hamlin Foundation, which you talk. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so when I first started to research, I was mainly going for things that are really obviously publicly funded, but the foundations kept coming up a lot, like Joseph Rowntree Foundation, the Claw Leadership or Foundation, there's just loads of them. And there's so many that you're even like, what's that new? It's just like you can't even keep up. But Paul Hamlin Foundation kept coming up on things that I thought looked a bit racially divisive and sort of not very nice. And they fund like Hope Not Hate, for instance, which most people hate. Like one of the biggest problems with Paul Hamlin Foundation is they basically believe in open borders. So they Hope Not Hate for instance, one of its migration funds, which is basically for anything that promotes, its activities promote open borders in a world where we're all free to move around. And then when I looked into Paul Hamlin Foundation, because everyone just kind of, perfectly reasonably, they just think, well, they're foundations, so, what they do with their money is up to them, until you look at the Charity Commission website. And Paul Hamlin Foundation receives 1.4 million, I think it is, across the periods are normally about 2019 to 22, 23, so in government grants. So that's money we've given.
1.4 million.
And it's all very racially divisive stuff. It's like charities and things where children get like racially divided. They're like almost obsessed with race. And then when you think about it, you then think they're funding. So Hope Not Hate's won around like £500,000 from the Paul Hamlin Foundation. It also had money from the government, like itself. It's had like 140,000, something thereabouts.
So it gets money from the government direct and also via Paul Hamlin.
And the most recent I know, 2019 to 20. So when Boris Johnson was in power, that was when Hope Not Hate was getting the government funding. That's on the Charity Commission website. And they also advise the Home Office on the counter-extremism unit. Really bizarre. But I don't know if they're because actually their releases on the Charity Commission, they're not out at the moment, I don't think. So I don't know if they were in Parliament the other day. Yeah. But yeah, to disentangle it, so you've got Hope Not Hate's already had their own pot of money of like 140,000 or whatever from the government grants. Then it gets funded by the Paul Hamlin Foundation, over 500,000. But we are funding the Paul Hamlin Foundation. It's had 1.4 million. So it's almost like we might as well just give them the extra bit ourselves.
Yes, exactly. It's what we're funding Hope Not Hate effectively.
But I think, and I'm not accusing them of doing this intentionally, but I think what it makes, it looks better on a Charity Commission website, on the statements when you're like, look, there's all these, often you just find it's really incestuous. There was one example where I found that the Arts Council England had funded something, and then I saw a foundation below on the tax return, and I went to go and check out the foundation, and they're funded by the Arts Council England. So that it looks like it's two names, and it looks kind of better, like, look how brilliant we are. Lots of people want to fund us, but then you're like, this is just kind of a little, sneaky cycle of money being moved around.
What do you think? I mean, this is we're talking millions, aren't we, overall?
Billions, yeah, probably.
I mean, Charlotte, what do you think should happen? What should be done about it? I mean, it shouldn't be paid, but I mean, so therefore, unfortunately now we're in a situation where people who will be very sympathetic to all of this are pretty much in charge now for the next 5 years. But it's not to say that the Conservatives before that were any better, actually. But basically, you've got to, how can that situation whereby government gives money to a charitable foundation, which must already be very rich, Paul Hamlin's publisher, isn't it? Or was a publisher. Can the rules be changed on that? I mean, how can this be prevented?
Yeah, to be fair, the charity register generally, you'd just be amazed. Like everyone in the whole world seems to be a charity. I mean, there's a lot of, it feels like everyone's getting rich apart from people in the private sector. It feels like it's this secret world that we don't know about. Like, can we get in on the game? You know, like how come we didn't know about this?
Yeah.
And, you know, if I decided, I mean, obviously I wouldn't get it now because people would know, they'd be able to Google me. But, you know, if I was like, I'm going to start the non-binary charity for refugees, I'm sure I could, like, if you spend enough time doing your grant, just as long as you prove that you're doing something right. Yeah, the challenge is that there's no Conservative to put this in place, the lack of, and I still have no idea how on earth this all happened in the first place. Part of the reason I'm doing woke waste, and maybe it sounds deluded and sort of a bit like Joan of Arc complex, but this is like, it's like a mission to me. It's not just a journalist thing. It's like, I guess I think about it very practically. I'm just like, there is actually something we can do about it. It might take blimmin' ages, but the first thing we need is an audit. It's like surveying. The first thing is like surveying a house or like anything, going into a business and working out the finances. It's like, what's going on? Like, why isn't this really working? And I think people are really fed up with part of it is, I mean, to go back a lot, is Tony Blair's to blame because he basically just splintered up democracy into all the quangos, and that makes it so the oversight is just much harder when you do that. Just like everyone's mates giving it to each other, and basically I want to de-blobify the blob, even if I do that on a Google Excel spreadsheet. I want to. The goal is to put it as much as a one-woman team can do. To get it, or to get other people doing it, to start getting people aware. Because we can only really do something about it. It's almost like the most bureaucratic battle. You know, people, the thing is, people know out there something's not right. They're like, this doesn't feel, I don't get what's going on, but something's not going right, like beneath the surface. But they don't really know. And it's almost like, I don't really think we have democracy. And I think it's really unfair because it kind of feels like all these people sort of who went university educated liberals sort of like sneaking off and doing their own little, little games.
It's like it's bleeding the state. I mean, totally above, above board and within the law. It seems to me. I mean, where can people? You're obviously on Twitter, but you mentioned Substack there. So is it known as Woke Waste on Substack, or is it Charlotte Gill?
I called it Charlotte Gill because one of my friends who's very good at PR advised me to. But also, one day I won't do woke waste. Well, I like branching out into other things as well. Like I've got a series on what's called Who Funds You, and that's my bit where I do like hope not hate.
Yeah.
And I sort of, turning the question on things like Sadiq Khan's organisation, C40, and things that no one ever looks around there. And then
you did highlight recently. It's like this new Sadiq Khan appointment. Is it for any kind of climate?
Oh yeah, Mete Koban. Yeah.
And he's on about 148 grand for what exactly? I don't know, but
this makes me fuming. The algorithms on Twitter were pretty useful in how I found him because they're actually so good for journalists. Like they completely know they knew what people were going to get wound up by. So they kept putting this guy in my feed talking about Hackney and climate change. And then one day he said, Hackney's spending 61 million on fighting climate change. And I thought, what? Hackney? Yeah. So then I just started digging around him. He was the environment councillor, but he also ran this charity that Tony Blair loved. I don't know, it was for youth democracy. And it just, when I analysed it, they just basically were like, oh yeah, we got them on TikTok and yeah, democracy. And he used that to justify flying all over the world. He was like installing LTNs. Then he literally was like cheeky weekend in Miami. He said that he needed to be in the White House and at like the G20 and the United Nations. He was like, I'm not going to apologise for being at the United Nations when he's like a Hackney councillor with a like
yeah,
a really superficial charity. And then he, Sadiq Khan, I mean, it just makes me angry. Like even one day he's in that job makes me, it's so wrong. It's just, taxpayers are just being treated, and Sadiq Khan's team, he loves hiring deputy mayors. And it's almost like trolling us. It's like, I'm going to hire another one. And they all get paid, you know, when you calculate it, it's like a million, like definitely over $1 million. He's got one that, when I looked into the other day, Justine Simons, and she is the deputy mayor for culture. She's responsible for the 4th plinth, that amazing thing. And bearing in mind that the Khan's office is so obsessed with getting rid of cars and having car-free day, I looked at her expenses and she's just getting taxis here, there and everywhere for short trips. Going to the most fancy dues. You'd think you were looking at a socialite if you look at her feed. And I just think these people are awful. And this is why I like feel like Javier Millet, you know, like afuera, you know, when he says that.
In her case, as well, I think kind of big kind of like jollies in different far off places, and the nights are at City Hall as well. Went to Sydney for some reason to look at the nightlife or something. A great expense. I mean, it just goes on and on and on, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, so if people want to, so basically if people want to, you know, keep abreast of what you're doing and the research you're doing, they should follow you on Twitter and they should go to your Substack. Is that right?
Yeah, Substack. And yeah, and I really encourage paid subscriptions because I'm doing it, a lot of it for free at the moment. And it's quite, it's a big project.
I say, so they should go to either at Woke Waste or at Charlotte Gill on Twitter, and then on Substack it is Charlotte Gill, is it?
If they just go to my Twitter, so it's Charlotte C. Gill, like at Charlotte C. Gill, they'll see in my bio that it says, it links directly to my Substack. Or if they just type me in, I think that it will come up as a link if they do Charlotte Gill Journalist. But yeah.
Well, look, thanks very much for telling us all about it. I mean, we haven't actually had anyone on this channel for, in the 4 years it's been going or whatever, talking about how much these things cost, actually. People are full of anger about even the fact that they exist, let alone that they're paying for them. Can you stay with us, because we have a few questions for our members, exclusive question. But thank you very much, Charlotte, for coming on. Thank you. That was Charlotte Gill. We shall see you next week. But in the meantime, have a lovely week, won't you? Okay, take care. Hello. If you're enjoying the New Culture Forum channel and you believe in our mission, may I invite you to join our membership scheme at the link below or on our website, newcultureforum.org.uk. Our work is more important now than ever, and we have great plans ahead for the future, but we can't do it without your support. From as little as £3 per month, you can help ensure that we continue on our mission. As a member, you'll receive a range of benefits, including access to exclusive content, invitations to our private events, including here at our studios, free copies of our books, and much, much more, including, of course, our famous NCF mug. If you aren't able to become a member, then please help us by clicking this button and subscribing to our channel. It's completely free. Just remember to also click the bell icon so that you can get notifications when we post new videos. Thank you.